Ethar El-Katatney is an Egyptian journalist from and in Cairo, and she joins us now by webcam. Ethar, thank you very much for speaking to us on The World. Now, my understanding is that Friday prayers have ended. There's a list of mosques where protesters from the Muslim Brotherhood have been asked to gather. What is happening and what is expected to happen in the next few hours?
I think the list has actually grown now to at least 28 mosques who are going to start marching right now. You have mosques immediately right after the prayers. They just started slogans, things like "the army and the police are a dirty hand," which is a joke on or not a joke, a sad kind of change of the army and the people are one hand. People have started going to the mosques. They will start marching from now, and the scale of the damage or the bloodshed that will happen today is something that's been, I think, keeping all of us up all night. It's just terrifying to think what could happen. You know, I have friends, colleagues, there isn't one household in Egypt that doesn't know someone who at least knows someone who has someone who's died. Every other household now. A friend of mine from college, 8 years, he just tweeted immediately right now saying his goodbyes to his wife, to his family, to his school friends in case he doesn't come back. And I think most of us are just shell-shocked and just in real terror at what today could happen.
When you say that carnage is likely, is that because the military has been authorized to use live fire?
Well, the reality is, how did all those people die? They died because of live fire. The theory here is that once the U.S. reaction was simply to cancel the military exercise, and it wasn't anything harsher, that then they could legitimately say, well, we're going to be using live fire. But it's on both sides. Both sides have ammunition. Both sides are very, very primed. The amount of hatred we're seeing of, Egyptians calling other Egyptians, I haven't heard anyone talk about, well, what Egyptians usually do, may they change the way they think, may God, let them see the light. It's all, may they die, thank God they're going to be gone. And it's just so overwhelming. So the carnage comes from two reasons. It comes from both sides calling for an all-out kind of do or die battle. For the Muslim Brotherhood, this is their, I don't know, you would call it kind of their 80-year biggest loss, which is the ideological and kind of failure in the country, which will reflect on all Islamists in the Middle East. The scale of the deaths, hundreds and hundreds of people killed, the footage, the carnage, the burned bodies, the mosque this morning at sunrise prayer, the mosque where they were keeping the dead bodies was allegedly kind of also broken into and the bodies taken away. Mass graves, there's just so much hitting you from all angles. It just snowballs and escalates into this pure rage. Even though there's organization and, marches going, I believe that what will actually lead to more carnage isn't, a structured, well, we're going to do this. It's the emotion that's kind of overtaking everyone at this moment on both sides.
You say there's emotion on both sides, or probably all sides, because I'm sure there's just more than two sides. But let me ask you about the reactions from the other political parties, for example, who contested elections, and of course the thousands of people who signed up to throw President Morsi out, which I suppose started this latest rebellion. I mean, surely nerves and emotions are frayed on that side, and nobody wants to see their fellow citizens gunned down, surely.
You see, the fragmentation that's happening on the Egyptian political scene is just phenomenal, how quickly people keep switching from one side to one side. There's a huge swath of the Egyptian population which are very much swing voters. We have a very large apathy. And, we've gone through now, we hate the president, Mubarak, we love the army, and then we hate the army, we love the president, we hate the president, we hate the army. And it's just so much. I can tell you that 3 days ago, you had a huge percentage of Egyptians kind of, very much against the Muslim Brotherhood. They were stopping the economy. The two sit-ins were really kind of clogging up not just transportation throughout the country, but because of the violence happening, everyone was not everyone, but a big portion of people were very against them. And now with the carnage that happened in the bloodshed, a huge portion again moved back towards extreme voter sympathy for them, very wide public sympathy over what happened to them. And today, if it moves the other way, if the Muslim Brotherhood continue on in their burning of churches, this is a huge situation, and not a lot of people are covering it. Dozens and dozens of churches and Christian institutions have been attacked, police stations, prisoners being released, government buildings, military installations attacked. So if they continue on in this violence, if they continue on in their retaliation, then that big sympathy that they got just yesterday and the day before will switch back again to, well, they're all just crazy peoples and they should all be locked up again, and Mubarak was right to keep them all locked up. So this is what keeps happening, is that Egyptians keep swinging from one side to another based on immediate circumstances and immediate events, and that's also reflected on the political sphere. You have very big activists who were very anti-Mubarak, who were very anti-army, and then switched to pro-Muslim Brotherhood, now being back, and even heads of political parties. And people just keep switching sides based on the immediate circumstances, and that's just only contributing to the confusion.
You, of course, mentioned the attack on Christian organisations. As I said earlier, there's not just two sides in all of this. How do you see this impasse? Of course, the interim government wouldn't talk to the Muslim Brotherhood some weeks ago. How is the coming together going to occur? When is the coming together going to occur?
Your guess is as good as mine. You see, and even when you say that statement, there's still a lot of debate over that. Did they really not reach a situation? Because there are reports coming out now that actually the Muslim Brotherhood was willing to compromise if the military would release their senior leaders who were in jail. There are other reports that say that no, the Muslim Brotherhood refused categorically, that they knew very well that the military was coming in, and they still stayed with their children. There are, children that are weeks old, people who died in this. And then you think, what kind of parents would take their children to a place they knew murder was coming? And that goes back again to the ideological kind of thought. So it's really hard to see how a compromise can be reached when there is absolutely no transparency on any of the sides. And again, like you just very, very correctly pointed out, it isn't a kind of black and white, these are the bad people, these are the good people, because every single side has committed so many mistakes. And there isn't any more, well, we were victims and you were the bad guys and we're going to forgive you, or we're going to come to a compromise. Now it's become what we call in Egypt atar, which is like a blood revenge, that you killed us and we have to kill you, an eye for an eye kind of thing. And that's what's actually happening today. So I doubt we can actually come to a compromise within the coming days, and the few upcoming hours will show us really what direction we're going in. But at this particular moment, I don't think anyone is very at all optimistic. The fact that the violence that occurred, there's a large portion of the Muslim Brotherhood is actually very much against violence and was willing to compromise. But the fact that there's a small portion which is capable of conducting an extended campaign of violence, and that this was the trigger that for them to then tell the peaceful ones, see what they did to us, and use kind of the rhetoric that if you don't sit in, if you don't give in your lives, if you don't become martyrs, then you are actually betraying your religion, which is the scary part here. They're not fighting anymore for their political party, they're simply fighting for their religion. And we've moved so quickly from, a nationalist versus secular to Islamist versus nationalistic to a liberal versus Islamist. It keeps changing, and I think this one is the scariest one, when people believe that they are actually fighting for their religion, that they are giving their lives for their religion and not simply for a president who was there or a political party. That's where the danger is, because these people really are, so many of them, really willing to die for what they believe is true.
Very quickly, before I let you go, is there any faith still in the interim government process and the military?
And what, excuse me?
Is there faith still in the interim government process and the military?
I think with al-Baradei's kind of resignation and the kind of disappearance of all these voices, and there's also a lot of face. For example, the prime minister, he came on television and talked about how this was a necessary step. Just a couple of months ago when we had carnage at Maspero, which is a television station, he resigned. He was finance minister at the time. He resigned because of the low, and there was a very, relative to what happened, a very small death count. He resigned because he believed that he couldn't be in charge or be part of a cabinet or government where where this occurred. And now hundreds of people died, and he said that it was justified. So when these kind of statements occur, this is when people lose their faith. And nothing has been heard from the military. General Sisi, no one's come up to say, the most we've heard is that the military will try and rebuild the churches again. But again, you hear statements like, security will be restored to this nation as if it was before January 25th. And that was by our interior minister. And you hear something like that and you're like, so we've been through 2.5 years to go of total and utter destruction of the country and of people's kind of humanity to reach a point where we'll go back to January 25th. So I think there's very little faith at this point. But again, it also depends a lot on what's going to happen today and the reaction from the military to the Muslim Brotherhood or to the fighting. If the death count keeps increasing, if the international community keeps interfering, which is the word Egyptians use, then again, that will shift to what people think. But one last point also, you also have to remember that there's a large percentage of Egyptians who are very silent, but silently supportive of the government, not in the deaths. And I think that's also one of the saddest things, that we've reached a point where we can say, it's very sad that they died, but you know, it was necessary to clean up the country. So they might not actually be going out into the streets, but they've silently given the government and the state kind of green light to do this. And they keep a kind of blind eye, kind of horse blinkers in the idea that, well, we'll just not think about the people who died and just think that this will be good for the country, rather than letting us, you know, totally go into free fall in terms of the economy and, you know, the ideological division that's happening.
Okay, Ethar El-Katatney, we appreciate your time at this very fluid, moving situation. Many thanks.
Please keep Egypt in your thoughts and prayers.